Well, I wasn't raised in any particular kind of religious tradition. And then when I was a teenager, maybe around middle school or just before starting high school, I started to experiment with Catholicism. And I got very involved in a youth group and started going to Mass. I was just really fascinated by the ritual of Mass, and I found that I found something about that very comforting. That was also around the same time that I was starting to come to terms with my sexuality, and as I was figuring out that I was gay, I started looking into, well, what does the Catholic Church say about this? And I didn't have people to talk to about it, so being the studious teenager that I was, I flipped through a catechism and just kind of read, the official Catholic line on homosexuality, and then I thought, well, okay, this isn't for me. I was in college. There was one semester I had an opening in my schedule, and I had to fill it with a class, and I just needed some random class, and I had heard from one of my professors that a Buddhist monk was going to be visiting and teaching a class on Buddhism, and I thought, that sounds kind of cool. I don't know anything about Buddhism, but I'll take a class with a monk. That sounds weird and fun. And so I took this class. It was Buddhist philosophy. It was really complex. It was all way over my head, but I loved it, and I fell in love with it. And I wound up changing my major. I'd been a biology major up to that point, changed my major to philosophy. I think about my professors in college as my first Dharma teachers, basically, even though that's not what they were doing. That wasn't their aim in the class, but that was my introduction into Buddhism. And then after I graduated from college, I went off and spent about a year in India at a Tibetan university, learning Tibetan language and studying Buddhist philosophy. But the more time I spent studying it and thinking about it, over time it just became a part of me. Buddhism says that if you follow Buddhism, one of the things that you are supposed to do is refrain from harming living things. So, Buddhists you don't have to be vegetarian to be Buddhist, but I'm vegetarian. And that was something that came about through just the time that I was living in India and just kind of thinking about things. But the other thing is, I never kill bugs if there's a bug in my office or in my house. And sometimes, when I'm around other people who don't know me that well or they don't know that part of me, if there's a spider or something and they go to squash it, I'll stop them and I'll, scoop it up and put it outside. That's kind of a silly, mundane sort of example. Because I think it's kind of hard to separate out sort of who I am and how my beliefs and my way of seeing the world, it's hard to kind of separate those things out. My connections to Buddhist traditions can help me to be able to take a step back and see a situation a little bit differently and see that the person who I'm disagreeing with, we're not as different, we're not as fundamentally separate as we might seem. And it's actually good that we're able to engage in debate and have conversations about things. And I think that's something, I think if we could all just see that, we could. I think debate is important. That's one of the things that I like so much about the Lawrence community is this ability to exchange ideas about so many different things. But I think if we were able to kind of take a step back and see, we're not as separate as we seem, and we all come to our viewpoints that we have because of certain causes and conditions, I think that can go a long way to helping to shape how we approach conversations that can sometimes be difficult or potentially heated. I really love the Lawrence community because the Lawrence community it's set up around this ethos of learning and asking questions, and it's It's not set up in the sense of, well, I'm the professor and I'm going to tell you, the student, how it is. And I learn from my students every day. Every time I have a conversation in class or outside of class with students or with other faculty or with staff or other people in the Lawrence community, that's an opportunity for me to learn and to grow and to change. And I think that is a result of being able to see that interdependence and that interconnectedness. I love it when people ask me questions about Buddhist practice. Because people will often ask, when people find out that I teach religious studies and that I primarily teach courses on Buddhism, one of the first questions that I am always asked is, are you a practicing Buddhist? And I always answer that with the question, what does practice mean? I think in America, traditionally when people think of a practicing Buddhist, they think of somebody sitting on a cushion meditating, which is a type of practice. But I think that Buddhist practice is much more broad than that. And in that sense, I think, it's important to have a community aspect to it. Yeah, a sangha, to other people to engage in practice with. There's something very valuable in sitting on a cushion and watching your breath or paying attention to physical sensations or whatever object of meditation you have. And there's something that feels very different when even sitting, when you're sitting with other people compared to sitting by yourself. But I also think that what it means to practice Buddhism extends beyond just the 30 minutes a day or however long you commit to sitting on a cushion. That extends into interactions that you have with other people. It extends to the choices that you make on a day-to-day basis. If you really think about the idea of interdependence and this non-distinction between self and other, that can influence your decisions about, I don't drive to campus most days. I walk or I ride my bike. And that's a decision that I make because I think about, okay, it's early October and it's almost 80 degrees outside, and maybe me driving my car is contributing to climate change, and maybe I'll walk today. And I think of that as a type of practice, a sort of recognition of this idea of interdependence. The students who've been coming this year and sitting with me at Sabin House, I don't know if they identify as Buddhist. It doesn't really matter if they identify as Buddhist. But there's something, I think, that we all get out of it by coming together and sitting and being intentional just for half an hour once a week. And my hope is that is something that benefits them as much as it benefits me. One of the things I love about Lawrence that's also kind of, it makes it hard to practice is there's so much energy at Lawrence, and everybody in the Lawrence community is so involved in so many different things. And it's wonderful, and it allows for, it enables for there to be this really great kind of energy on campus. And at the same time, I see among my colleagues and among students, we get a few weeks into the term and people start to get burnt out. And when you start to get burnt out, you start to lose some of that awareness, or it becomes harder to maintain that sort of awareness. Yeah, I would encourage people to take the time to learn about different faiths, different religious traditions, different belief systems, whether that's spending time with groups that meet at Sabin House, whether that's taking religious studies courses, whether that's going out into the community and just kind of exploring. I think there's a lot that can be learned by learning about how other people see the world and how other people approach things. And I think, you can go to a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a meditation session, all these different things, without having to commit to what the people there are believing. And I think we could go a long way as a community. We could do a lot to help influence other people outside of our community if we could take the time to learn more about as many different faith traditions as we can, as we have time for, because that leads to more understanding. It leads to, again, just a greater understanding of the interdependence, the interconnectedness of all things and all people.